I came home from school at 17 and found my house completely empty. No warning. No goodbye. Just a note on the kitchen counter that said, "You'll figure it out." Before I tell you how it unfolded, tell me, where are you watching from right now? Because what happened next didn't break me immediately, it trained me to survive in ways they never expected. I was 17 the day I walked into a house that no longer belonged to me. The air felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Too still. Too quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until you realize something is missing. Everything was missing. The couch was gone. The dining chairs were gone. The framed photos that used to crowd the hallway were stripped from the walls, leaving pale rectangles like scars. My backpack slid off my shoulder and hit the floor, the sound echoing in a way that made my chest tighten. I remember calling out, soft at first, then louder. No answer. That's when I saw the note. It sat in the center of the kitchen counter, weighted down by a mug I didn't recognize. One line. 4 words. "You'll figure it out." I read it 3 times, like it might rearrange itself into something kinder if I stared long enough. It didn't. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stood there, trying to understand what kind of parents leave a sentence like that behind. Trying to understand what I had done to deserve it. I hadn't been a difficult kid. I'd been the quiet one. The helpful one. The one who made herself small, so no one would have to make room for her. At 13, I baked my mother a birthday cake from scratch. She took one bite and laughed, said it was clumpy, and ordered dessert instead. At 15, I stayed up night after night tutoring my younger brother, Lucas, through finals. He passed, slammed his door, and told me to stop acting superior. At 16, I handed my dad my entire paycheck so he could cover utilities. Weeks later, when I asked about it, he told me I was ungrateful for even bringing it up. I was always useful. I just wasn't wanted. A week after the note, the landlord knocked. He looked uncomfortable, like he didn't want to be the one saying the words. The lease had been terminated early. I had 7 days. 7 days to pack up a life that had already been erased. I rotated through friends' couches until the invitations dried up. Eventually, I rented the cheapest storage unit I could afford and slept in the back of it, curling myself between plastic bins like I was something meant to be hidden. I showered at the YMCA before dawn, ate peanut butter straight from the jar because it didn't require cooking or questions. I applied for jobs on library computers and smiled like nothing was wrong. Most paragraphs of my life back then ended with a question I didn't know how to answer. How long can a person pretend? How invisible can you become before you disappear? I got hired at a diner on the night shift. The manager, a woman named Ruth, didn't ask too many questions. She paid me cash. Once, when I nearly collapsed in the break room, she closed the door and let me sleep for 20 minutes. I never forgot that kindness. I still won't. The first year was survival. Just survival. I bought a prepaid phone, watched free videos on budgeting, saved every receipt like proof that I existed. Somewhere in that grind, something shifted. A regular customer offered me a short-term job organizing office files. It paid triple what the diner did. I said yes before he finished the sentence. That job led to another. And another. I showed up early. I asked questions. I learned how systems worked. By 22, I was freelancing full-time. By 25, I launched my own consulting business with a borrowed laptop and a folding table. By 27, I had contractors, an office, clients I used to Google for inspiration. And by 29, my bank app showed a number I had never imagined seeing next to my name. I didn't celebrate. I cried. Quietly. Alone. Because no one in my family knew. No one had checked in. Not once. Last month, a podcast interview I did about surviving family estrangement went viral. 1 million views in 4 days. Messages poured in from strangers saying they finally felt seen. And then one email stopped me cold. "You're still our daughter." It was from my mother. No apology. Just a suggestion that maybe we could talk. An hour later, another message came in. From Lucas. "We miss you. Can we fix this?" I stared at the screen, feeling something old stir in my chest. Not hope. Not anger. Something heavier. Something unfinished. I closed the laptop and didn't respond. Not yet. Because if I'd learned anything over 12 years, it was this. When people come back after silence, It's never by accident. And I was about to find out exactly why now. I didn't respond to the emails right away. I let them sit unopened for 2 full days, glowing on my screen like they were alive. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach tightened, even though I already knew who it wasn't. It wasn't an emergency. It wasn't a client. It wasn't good news. It was the past, knocking softly, pretending it deserved to be let in. I kept replaying that sentence from my mother's message. You're still our daughter. It landed wrong. Not comforting. Not warm. Like a label slapped on a box she'd abandoned years ago and suddenly wanted back. Before I tell you how it unfolded, tell me, where are you watching from right now? Because what I realized next didn't come from anger. It came from clarity. I finally opened my brother's message first. His name was Ethan. Seeing it still felt strange, like recognizing a handwriting style I hadn't seen since childhood. His message was short. Too short. We miss you. Can we talk? No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a door cracked open enough for him to step through if I allowed it. I stared at the cursor blinking in the reply box. That tiny vertical line felt heavier than it should have. 12 years of silence reduced to a single question. I typed erased, typed again. Then I stopped pretending I didn't know what I wanted to ask. It's been 12 years, I wrote. What changed? I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. The second the message went through, regret washed over me. Not because I'd reached out, but because I knew whatever came back might confirm what I'd always feared. His response came faster than I expected. He said seeing my interview online had shaken him. That hearing me talk about surviving on my own made something click. That he'd been young back then. That he didn't know how bad it was. That he'd thought about me more times than he could count. The words looked right. Too right. I leaned back in my chair, eyes on the ceiling, listening to the hum of my apartment. If he'd thought about me all those times, why had none of them turned into a message? I asked him that, directly. This time, his reply took longer. When it came, it was heavier. He admitted things weren't going well for them. That our parents' finances had collapsed years ago. That his own life felt unstable. That his wife was expecting their second child. That medical bills were piling up. That stress was everywhere. There it was. Not the reason they'd reached out, but the reason now. I closed my laptop and didn't open it again for a week. During that week, I went through my routines like muscle memory. Morning workouts, client calls, late dinners, therapy on Thursday. I didn't bring up the emails at first. My therapist, Lauren, noticed anyway. You're quieter, she said gently. Something circling. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt. She rarely did. When I finished, she said something that stuck with me. You're not obligated to reopen a door just because someone finally noticed it was closed. That night, my mother sent another message. This one had attachments. Old photos. Me as a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. A beach trip I barely remembered. A picture of Ethan and me building a snowman. Both smiling, both unaware of what would come later. At the bottom of the email, one sentence. We made mistakes. We want to talk. Mistakes. Plural. Vague. Weightless. I stared at the photos longer than I meant to. They didn't feel like memories. They felt like props from a life that never belonged to me. Still, something shifted. Not forgiveness. Curiosity. I agreed to meet Ethan. Just him. No parents. Neutral ground. A coffee shop halfway between our cities. Public. Daytime. 1 hour. The morning of the meeting, my hands shook as I zipped my jacket. Not fear. Anticipation. Like my body remembered things my mind had buried. He was already there when I walked in. Older. Broader. Tired in a way I recognized. We didn't hug. We sat across from each other like strangers who shared a last name. The first 20 minutes were unbearable. Weather. Traffic. Coffee. Then he broke. I'm sorry, he said, voice cracking. I should have done something. I didn't respond. I watched. Listened. Let silence do the work. He told me he'd been 15. That he'd been scared. That our parents told him I wanted to stay behind. That they said I had a plan. That I was strong. I laughed once. Short. Sharp. I told him about the storage unit. About the YMCA showers. About working nights while pretending I wasn't exhausted. About being 17 and realizing no one was coming back for me. His face collapsed. "I didn't know," he whispered. And that's when it hit me. Not knowing didn't erase responsibility. When we stood to leave, he hugged me. I let it happen. I didn't return it. My arms stayed at my sides, heavy with things I wasn't ready to give. That night, my mother called. I didn't give her my number, which meant Ethan had. I answered out of curiosity. That was my first mistake. She cried, told me she was proud, said she'd always known I'd succeed, said I was special. I asked her the same question I'd asked Ethan. Why me? Her answer was calm, practical. They were struggling. They believed I'd manage. They thought it was best. I hung up without saying goodbye. The next morning, an email from my father arrived. No apology, just explanations, justifications. And then, at the very end, a request for help. That was the moment everything crystallized. Not anger, not sadness, understanding. They didn't miss me. They missed what I could provide. And once I saw that clearly, I knew whatever came next would change the direction of everything, because this wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of the confrontation I'd avoided for 12 years. And I hadn't even decided yet how far I was willing to let it go. I didn't reply to my father's email. I didn't need to. The message wasn't really for me anyway. It was for what I represented. A solution. A backup plan. An escape route. Lauren confirmed that during our next session. What do you want to happen now? She asked. The question caught me off guard. I was so used to reacting that I hadn't considered choosing. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants answers. Part of me wants distance. And part of me still wants them to care. She nodded slowly. Those parts can exist at the same time. But only one of them should make decisions. That stayed with me. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't an email. It was a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. My father's voice filled the room. He talked about hardship, about sacrifices, about how difficult life had been for them. Then he mentioned medical costs, housing issues, pressure, and finally, carefully, he asked if I could help the family. Not once did he ask how I'd survived. I forwarded the voicemail to Lauren with a single line. This is why they're back. She replied almost immediately. Now you see the pattern. The next message came from Ethan. His tone was different this time. Sharper. He said our parents were hurt, that they felt rejected, that they were struggling, that family was supposed to stick together. That word again. Family. Before I tell you how it unfolded, tell me, have you ever noticed how quickly we turns into you owe us when money enters the conversation? I didn't respond. Instead, I booked a flight. I needed space, physical space, to think clearly. I spent a week near the coast, walking long stretches of beach, letting the sound of the water drown out the noise in my head. I didn't check my inbox. I didn't answer calls. I breathed. When I came back, the messages had multiplied. Emails, missed calls, even a handwritten letter forwarded through an old address. My mother wrote about memories. My father wrote about responsibility. Ethan wrote about disappointment. I read them all once. Just once. Then I did something I'd never done before. I set boundaries in writing. I told Ethan I was willing to rebuild with him, slowly, cautiously, and without pressure. No financial involvement. No relaying messages. No pushing me toward our parents. If those boundaries weren't respected, the door would close again. His response came within minutes. He said he understood. Then, immediately after, he added that our parents were desperate and didn't deserve to be punished forever. That was the moment I realized something important. Understanding isn't the same as respect. I didn't reply. 2 days later, my building's front desk called. There were visitors asking for me. A couple. They wouldn't give names. My chest tightened. I told security I wasn't accepting visitors. Minutes later, another call. Same couple. Still waiting. I stayed where I was, heart pounding, staring at my door like it might open on its own. When they finally left, I sat on the floor and shook. Not because I was scared of them, but because I finally understood how far they were willing to push. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I found flowers outside my door. No card. No signature. Just an unspoken message. We know where you are. I called Lauren immediately. That's not reconciliation, she said calmly. That's pressure. She was right. I called a lawyer that afternoon. Not to escalate, but to protect myself. Documentation. Advice. Options. That same evening, Ethan called again. I answered this time. He sounded exhausted, said things were spiraling, that our parents weren't taking Noel, that they felt entitled to a conversation. I told him the truth. They don't want closure, I said quietly. They want access. Silence stretched between us. Then he said something that surprised me. They showed up at my place too. That stopped me cold. He explained how they'd pressured him, demanded updates, accused him of siding with me. How his wife had started feeling unsafe. How tension had filled their home. For the first time, I heard fear in his voice. And that's when everything shifted again, because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was spreading. We agreed to meet again. This time with his wife. Public place. Daytime. When I saw her, I understood immediately why she'd come. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She listened more than she spoke. And when she did speak, it was carefully. She told me she'd only learned the full truth recently. That the story she'd been told didn't match what she'd heard in my interview. That things weren't adding up. She apologized for believing a version that erased me. That mattered more than she knew. Then she showed me something. Old posts. Messages. Public comments made years after I'd been abandoned, crafted to make it look like I'd chosen to leave. Like I'd disappeared on them. My stomach dropped. They hadn't just left me. They'd rewritten me. I went home that night knowing one thing for certain. Whatever came next couldn't be quiet, because silence was how they'd gotten away with it for 12 years. And I was done being silent. Once I saw those posts, I couldn't unsee them. Every carefully worded message, every public prayer request, every comment about their lost daughter wasn't grief. It was image management. They hadn't just erased me from their lives. They'd replaced me with a version that made them look blameless. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch with my laptop open, scrolling through years of archived lies, saving everything. Dates, screenshots, context. Not to expose them publicly. Not yet. But because for the first time, I understood something clearly. They weren't confused about what they'd done. They were afraid the truth was catching up. The next morning, my lawyer confirmed it. If they're escalating contact after you set boundaries, that's not coincidence. That's panic. That afternoon, Ethan called again. His voice was tight. They showed up at my house, he said. My wife's scared. They won't stop calling. Before I tell you how it unfolded, tell me, have you ever watched a pattern repeat so clearly that denial was no longer possible? That was the moment I made my decision. I told Ethan and his wife they could stay with me if they needed space. My building had security, cameras, people who knew my face. For the first time in years, I wasn't going to handle this alone. That night, my phone lit up with messages I didn't respond to. Accusations, guilt, pressure disguised as concern. Then one message crossed a line. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was a photo. A picture of Ethan's child at a playground. No words. Just the image. My hands went cold. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I forwarded it directly to my lawyer and then called him. He didn't hesitate. This changes everything, he said. We involve authorities. Immediately. By morning, reports were filed. Documentation submitted. Boundaries formalized into something enforceable. My parents were contacted. Not by me, but through official channels. And suddenly, the messages stopped. No calls. No emails. No visits. Silence. A week passed. Then two. I waited for the other shoe to drop, but it didn't. Instead, a letter arrived, forwarded through my lawyer so my address stayed protected. This one was different. No requests. No guilt. No rewriting. Just acknowledgement. They admitted leaving me. Admitted lying. Admitted they'd lost control of the narrative and panicked when they realized I no longer needed them. They said they would respect the boundaries. That they were seeking help. That they understood if I never wanted contact again. I didn't feel relief. I felt finality. Ethan got a similar letter. We talked about it over dinner one night, sitting across from each other like two people who had survived the same storm in different boats. I wish I'd known sooner, he said quietly. I wish you'd looked. I replied just as quietly. He nodded. No defense. No excuses. That mattered. Life didn't magically soften after that. I still flinch when my phone rings unexpectedly. I still double-check locks. I still work through old wounds in therapy. But something fundamental changed. I stopped waiting for permission to move forward. My apartment filled with life. Shared meals, laughter, a child calling my name like it belonged to her. Not because we were fixing the past, but because we were building something honest in the present. Months later, at a small birthday party crowded into my living room, I caught myself watching Ethan's child run between rooms, safe and unaware of how close she'd come to being pulled into the same cycle. And I understood something important. Breaking a pattern doesn't require forgiveness. It requires clarity and the courage to choose differently. Sometimes people ask if I'll ever reconnect fully, if time will soften things, if family always deserves another chance. I don't know. What I do know is this: I figured it out. Not the way they meant when they left that note, but in the only way that mattered. I learned that family isn't who claims you when it's convenient. It's who respects your boundaries when it isn't. And I finally built a life where no one gets access to me just because they share my last name.